Good afternoon. My name is Chris Edwards, and welcome to our latest installment of Eventide Tales. Eventide Theater Company has been working very hard through this dark and very, very cold winter so far to bring you entertainment that helps keep everyone here in our community connected. It's very important to us as a theater organization to remain in touch with our patrons, with our neighbors, with the folks in our community. And one of the ways we do this is through this programming. If you enjoy what you see here today, I would encourage you all to please take a moment and consider making a donation. You can donate, you can text 44321 and make a donation to Eventide Theater by texting that number. Or you can go to our website and make a connection as well. Every little thing you do to help support our mission goes directly to help supporting what we do, what we produce, and the art that we bring to the table. We hope that you enjoy seeing the programming that we present. And without me rambling on any longer, I'd like to turn our programming over to Toby Wilson, who is the director for today's Eventide Tales. Toby?
Thank you, Chris. And thank you, everyone, for joining us here today. We have four very eclectic and interesting stories for you today. And the way I see this is, in essence, entertainment 1.0, where one person tells a story to a group of people. This goes back to the earliest days of mankind, but fortunately, now we don't have to sit around in a cave around a fire in order to enjoy it. So we're going to begin our stories today. Our first one is by Oscar Wilde. Oscar Wilde was known for his biting wit, flamboyant dress, and glittering conversational skill, and Wilde became one of the best-known personalities of his day. A writer of many plays, books, and poems, Wilde was also a journalist and a publisher, and wrote many of his short stories for newspapers and magazines. Wilde collected some of his short stories for publication in a collection called Lord Arthur Saville's Crime and Other Stories. This group of stories included The Canterville Ghost, The Model Millionaire, and the story you will hear now, The Sphinx Without a Secret, to be read today by Elizabeth Lucci.
The Sphinx Without a Secret by Oscar Wilde. One afternoon, I was sitting outside the Café de la Paix, watching the splendor and shabbiness of Parisian life and wondering over my vermouth at the strange panorama of pride and poverty that was passing before me, when I heard someone call my name. I turned round and saw Lord Murchison. We had not met since we'd been at college together nearly 10 years before. So I was delighted to come across him again, and we shook hands warmly. At Oxford, we had been great friends. I liked him immensely. He was so handsome, so high-spirited, and so honorable. We used to say of him that he would be the best of fellows if he did not always speak the truth. But I think we really admired him all the more for his frankness. I found him a good deal changed. He looked anxious and puzzled and seemed to be in doubt about something. I felt it could not be modern skepticism, for Murchison was the stoutest of Tories and believed in the Old Testament as firmly as he believed in the House of Peers. So I concluded that it was a woman, and asked him if he was married yet. I don't understand women well enough, he answered. Oh, my dear Gerald, I said, women are meant to be loved, not to be understood. I cannot love where I cannot trust, he replied. I believe you have a mystery in your life, Gerald, I exclaimed. Tell me about it. Let us go for a drive, he answered. It's too crowded here. No, not a yellow carriage. Any other color. There, that dark green one will do. And in a few moments, we were trotting down the boulevard in the direction of the Madeleine. Where shall we go to? I said. Oh, anywhere you like, he answered. To the restaurant in the Bois. We'll dine there and you shall tell me all about yourself. I want to hear about you first, I said. Tell me your mystery. He took from his pocket a little silver-clasped morocco case and handed to me. I opened it. Inside there was a photograph of a woman. She was tall and slight and strangely picturesque with her large, vague eyes and loosened hair. She looked like a clairvoyant and was wrapped in rich furs. "What do you think of that face?" he said. "Is it truthful?" I examined it carefully. It seemed to me the face of someone who had a secret. But whether that secret was good or evil, I could not say. Its beauty was a beauty molded out of many mysteries, the beauty in face, which is psychological, not plastic. And the faint smile that just played across the lips was far too subtle to be really sweet. "Well," he cried impatiently, "what do you say?" "She is the Mona Lisa in sables," I answered. "Let me know all about her." "Not now," he said, "after dinner," and began to talk of other things. When the waiter brought us our coffee and cigarettes, I reminded Gerald of his promise. He rose from his seat, walked 2 or 3 times up and down the room, and sinking into an armchair, told me the following story. "One evening," he said, "I was walking down Bond Street about 5 o'clock. There was a terrific crush of carriages and the traffic was almost stopped. Close to the pavement was standing a little yellow brougham, which for some reason or other attracted my attention. As I passed by, there looked out from it the face I showed you this afternoon. It fascinated me immediately. All that night I kept thinking of it, and all the next day I wandered up and down the wretched row, peering into every carriage and waiting for the yellow brougham. But I could not find ma belle inconnue, my beautiful stranger. And at last I began to think she was merely a dream. About a week afterwards, I was dining with Madame de Rastal. Dinner was for 8 o'clock, but at 8:30 we were still waiting in the drawing room. Finally, the servant threw open the door and announced Lady Alroy. It was the woman I had been looking for. She came in very slowly, looking like a moonbeam in gray lace. And to my intense delight, I was asked to take her in to dinner. After we had sat down, I remarked quite innocently, "I think I caught sight of you in Bond Street some time ago, Lady Alroy." She grew pale and said to me in a low voice, "Pray do not talk so loud. You may be overheard." I felt miserable at having made such a bad beginning and plunged recklessly into the subject of French plays. She spoke very little, always in the same low musical voice, and seemed as if she was afraid of someone listening. I felt passionately, stupidly in love, and the indefinable atmosphere of mystery that surrounded her excited my most ardent curiosity. When she was going away, which she did very soon after dinner, I asked her if I might call and see her. She hesitated for a moment, glanced round to see if anyone was near us, and then said, "Yes, tomorrow at 5:15. I begged Madame de Ristal to tell me about her, but all that I could learn was that she was a widow with a beautiful house in Park Lane. I left and went home. The next day I arrived at Park Lane, punctual to the moment, but was told by the butler that Lady Alroy had just gone out. I went down to the club quite unhappy and very much puzzled, and after long consideration wrote her a letter asking if I might be allowed to try my chance some other afternoon. I had no answer for several days, but at last I got a little note saying she would be at home on Sunday at 4, and with this extraordinary postscript: "Please do not write to me here again. I will explain when I see you." On Sunday, she received me and was perfectly charming. But when I was going away, she begged of me, if I ever had occasion to write to her again, to address my letter to Mrs. Knox, care of Whitaker's Library, Green Street. There are reasons, she said, why I cannot receive letters in my own house. All through the season, I saw a great deal of her, and the atmosphere of mystery never left her. Sometimes I thought that she was in the power of some man, but she looked so unapproachable that I could not believe it. It was really very difficult for me to come to any conclusion, for she was like one of those strange crystals that one sees in museums, which are at one moment clear and at another clouded. At last, I determined to ask her to be my wife. I was sick and tired of the incessant secrecy that she had imposed on all my visits and on the few letters I sent her. I wrote to her at the library to ask if she could see me the following Monday at 6. She answered yes, and I was in the seventh heaven of delight. I was infatuated with her, in spite of the mystery, I thought then. In consequence of it, I see now. No, it was the woman herself I loved. The mystery troubled me, maddened me. Why did chance put me in its track? You discovered it then, I cried. I fear so, he answered. You can judge for yourself. When Monday came round, I went to lunch with my uncle, and about 4 o'clock found myself in the Marylebone Road. My uncle, you know, lives in Regent's Park. I wanted to get to Piccadilly and took a short cut through a lot of shabby little streets. Suddenly I saw in front of me Lady Alroy, deeply veiled and walking very fast. On coming to the last house in the street, she went up the steps, took out a latchkey and let herself in. Here is the mystery, I said to myself, and I hurried on and examined the house. It seemed a sort of place for letting lodges. On the doorstep lay her handkerchief, which she had dropped. I picked it up and put it in my pocket. Then I began to consider what I should do. I came to the conclusion that I had no right to spy on her, and I drove down to the club. At 6 o'clock, I called to see her. She was lying on a sofa in a tea gown of silver tissue, looped up by some strange moonstones that she always wore. She was looking quite lovely. I'm so glad to see you, she said. I've not been out all day. I stared at her in amazement and, pulling the handkerchief out of my pocket, handed it to her. You dropped this in Cumnor Street this afternoon, Lady Alroy, I said very calmly. She looked at me in terror, but made no attempt to take the handkerchief. What were you doing there? I asked. What right do you have to question me? She answered. The right of a man who loves you, I replied. I came here to ask you to be my wife. She hid her face in her hands and burst into a flood of tears. You must tell me, I continued. She stood up and, looking me straight in the face, said, Lord Murchison, there is nothing to tell you. You went to meet someone, I cried. This is your mystery. She grew dreadfully white and said, I went to meet no one. Can't you tell the truth? I exclaimed. I have told it, she replied. I was mad, frantic. I didn't know what I said, but I said terrible things to her. Finally, I rushed out of the house. She wrote me a letter the next day. I sent it back unopened and started for Norway with Alan Colville. After a month, I came back, and the first thing I saw in the Morning Post was the death of Lady Alroy. She had caught a chill at the opera and had died in 5 days of congestion of the lungs. I shut myself up and saw no one. I had loved her so much. I had loved her so madly. Good God, how I'd love that woman. You went to the street, to the house in it? I said. Yes, he answered. One day I went to Cumnor Street. I could not help it. I was tortured with doubt. I knocked at the door. and a respectable looking woman opened it to me. I asked her if she had any rooms to let. Well, sir, she replied, the drawing rooms are supposed to be let, but I've not seen the lady for 3 months, and as rent is owing on them, you can have them. Is this the lady? I said, showing the photograph. Well, that's her, sure enough, she exclaimed. And when is she coming back, sir? The lady is dead, I replied. Oh, sir, I hope not, said the lady. She was my best lodger. She paid me 3 guineas a week merely to sit in my drawing room now and then. She met someone here? I said. But the woman assured me that it was not so, that she always came alone and saw no one. What on earth did she do here? I cried. She simply sat in the drawing room, sir, reading books and sometimes had tea, the woman answered. I did not know what to say, so I gave her a sovereign and went away. Now, what do you think it all meant? You don't believe the woman was telling the truth? I do. Then why did Lady Alroy go there? My dear Gerald, I answered, Lady Alroy was simply a woman with a mania for mystery. She took these rooms for the pleasure of going there with her veil down and imagining she was a heroine. She had a passion for secrecy, but she herself was merely a sphinx without a secret. Do you really think so? I am sure of it, I replied. He took out the Morocco case, opened it, and looked at the photograph. I wonder, he said at last.
Thank you, Liz. Our next story is by a German writer named Heinrich Boll. Heinrich Theodor Boll was one of Germany's foremost post-World War II writers. Boll's ironic novels on the travails of German life during and after World War II captured the changing psychology of the German nation and was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1972. For 1 year after the war, Boll worked in a municipal statistical bureau, which may have been the inspiration for this next story. Action Will Be Taken, an action-packed story. To be read here by Ricky Bourgeois.
Action Will Be Taken, an action-packed story by Heinrich Boll. Probably one of the strangest interludes in my life was the time I spent as an employee in Alfred Wunsiedel's factory. By nature, I am inclined more to pensiveness and inactivity than to work, but now and again, prolonged financial difficulties compel me, for pensiveness is no more profitable than inactivity, to take on a so-called job. Finding myself once again at a low ebb of this kind, I put myself in the hands of the employment office and was sent with 7 other fellow sufferers to Wunsiedel's factory, where we were to undergo an aptitude test. The exterior of the factory was enough to arouse my suspicions. It was built entirely of glass brick, and my aversion to well-lit buildings and well-lit rooms is as strong as my aversion to work. I became even more suspicious when we were immediately served breakfast in the well-lit, cheerful coffee shop. Pretty waitresses brought us eggs, coffee, and toast. Orange juice was served in tastefully designed jugs. Goldfish pressed their bored faces against the sides of pale green aquariums. The waitresses were so cheerful they appeared to be bursting with good cheer. Only a strong effort of will, so it seemed to me, restrained them from singing away all day long. They were as crammed with unsung songs as chicken with unlaid eggs. Right away, I realized something my fellow sufferers evidently failed to realize. This breakfast was already part of the test, so I chewed away fervently, with the full appreciation of a person who knows he is supplying his body with valuable elements. I did something which normally no power on earth can make me do. I drank orange juice on an empty stomach, left the coffee and egg untouched, as well as most of the toast, got up and paced up and down in the coffee shop, pregnant with action. As a result, I was the first to be ushered into the room where the questionnaires were spread out on attractive tables. The walls were done in a shade of green that would have summoned the word delightful from the lips of an interior decoration enthusiast. The room appeared to be empty, and yet I was so sure of being observed that I behaved as someone pregnant with action behaves when he believes himself unobserved. I ripped my pen impatiently from my pocket, unscrewed the top, sat down at the nearest table and pulled the questionnaire toward me the way irritable customers snatch at the bill in a restaurant. Question number 1. Do you consider it right for a human being to possess only 2 arms, 2 legs, eyes, and ears? Here, for the first time, I reaped the harvest of my pensive nature and wrote without hesitation. Even 4 arms, legs, and ears would not be adequate for my driving energy. Human beings are very poorly equipped. Question number 2. How many telephones can you handle at one time? Here again, the answer was as easy as simple arithmetic. When there are only 7 telephones, I wrote, I get impatient. There have to be 9 before I feel I am working to capacity. Question number 3. How do you spend your free time? My answer? I no longer acknowledge the term free time. On my 15th birthday, I eliminated it from my vocabulary. For in the beginning was the act. I got the job. Even with 9 telephones, I really didn't feel I was working to capacity. I shouted into the mouthpieces, take immediate action, or do something. We must have some action. Action will be taken. Action has been taken. Action should be taken. But as a rule, for I felt this was in keeping with the tone of the place, I used the imperative. Of considerable interest were the noon hour breaks when we consumed nutritious foods in an atmosphere of silent good cheer. Wunsiedel's factory was swarming with people who were obsessed with telling you the story of their lives, as indeed vigorous personalities are fond of doing. The story of their lives is more important to them than their lives. You have only to press a button, and immediately it is covered with spewed out exploits. Wunsiedel had a right-hand man called Broschek, who had in turn made a name for himself by supporting 7 children and a paralyzed wife by working night shifts in his student days and successfully carrying on 4 business agencies, besides which he had passed 2 examinations with honors in 2 years. When asked by reporters, "When do you sleep, Mr. Broschek?" he had replied, "It's a crime to sleep." Wunsiedel's secretary had supported a paralyzed husband and 4 children by knitting, at the same time graduating in psychology and German history, as well as breeding shepherd dogs, and she had become a famous nightclub singer known as Vamp Number 7. Wunsiedel himself was one of those people who every morning as they open their eyes make up their minds to act. I must act, they think, as they briskly tie their bathrobe belts around them. I must act, they think, as they shave, triumphantly watching their beard hairs being washed away with the lather. These hirsute vestiges are the first daily sacrifices to their driving energy. The more intimate functions also give these people a sense of satisfaction. Water swishes, paper is used, action has been taken, bread gets eaten, eggs are decapitated. With Wunsiedel, the most trivial activity looked like action. The way he put on his coat, the way, quivering with energy, he buttoned his overcoat, the kiss he gave his wife, everything was action. When he arrived at his office, he greeted his secretary with a cry of, "Let's have some action." And in ringing tones, she would call back, "Action will be taken." Wunsiedel then went from department to department, calling out his cheerful, "Let's have some action." everyone would answer, "Action will be taken." And I would call that to him too with a radiant smile when he looked into my office. Action will be taken. Within a week, I had increased the number of phones on my desk to 11. Within 2 weeks to 13. And every morning on the streetcar, I enjoyed thinking up new imperatives or chasing the words "take action" through various tenses and modulations. For 2 whole days, I kept saying the same sentence over and over because I thought it sounded so marvelous. Action ought to have been taken. For another 2 days, it was such action ought not to have been taken. So I was really beginning to feel I was working to capacity when there actually was some action. One Tuesday morning, I had hardly settled down at my desk. Wunsiedel rushed into my office crying his, "Let's have some action!" But an inexplicable something in his face made me hesitate to reply. In a cheerful, gay voice, as the rules dictated, "Action will be taken." But I must have paused for too long, for Wunsiedel, who seldom raised his voice, shouted at me, "Answer! Answer! You know the rules!" And I answered under my breath reluctantly, like a child who is forced to say, "I am a naughty child." It was only by a great effort that I managed to bring out the sentence, "Action will be taken." And hardly had I uttered it when there really was some action. Wunsiedel dropped to the floor. As he fell, he rolled over onto his side and lay right across the open doorway. I knew at once, and I confirmed it when I went slowly around my desk and approached the body on the floor. He was dead. Shaking my head, I stepped over Wunsiedel, walked slowly along the corridor to Braschek's office, and entered without knocking. Braschek was sitting at his desk with a telephone receiver in each hand, between his teeth a ballpoint pen with which he was making notes on a writing pad, while with his bare feet he was operating a knitting machine under his desk. In this way, he helps to clothe his family. "We've had some action," I said in a low voice. Braschek spat out the ballpoint pen, put down the 2 receivers, reluctantly detached his toes from the knitting machine. "What action?" he asked. "Wunsiedel is dead," I said. "No," Braschek said. "Yes," I said. "Come and have a look." "No," Braschek said, "that's impossible." But he put on his slippers and followed me along the corridor. "No," he said, when we stood beside Wunsiedel's corpse. "No, no!" I did not contradict him. I carefully turned Wunsiedel over onto his back, closed his eyes, and looked at him pensively. I felt something like tenderness for him, and I realized for the first time I had never hated him. On his face was that expression which one sees on children who obstinately refuse to give up their faith in Santa Claus, even though the arguments of their playmates sound so convincing. "No," Braschek said. "No. We must take action," I said quietly to Braschek. "Yes," Braschek said, "we must take action." Action was taken. Wunsiedel was buried, and I was delegated to carry a wreath of artificial roses behind his coffin, for I am equipped with not only a penchant for pensiveness and inactivity, but also a face and a figure that go extremely well with dark suits. Apparently, as I walked along beside Wunsiedel's coffin, carrying the wreath of artificial roses, I looked superb. I received an offer from a fashionable firm of funeral directors to join their staff as a professional mourner. "You are a born mourner," the manager said. "Your outfit would be provided by the firm. But your face is simply superb." I handed in my notice to Braschek, explaining that I had never felt I was really working to capacity there, that in spite of the 13 telephones, some of my talents were going to waste. As soon as my first professional appearance as a mourner was over, I knew this is where I belong. This is what I am cut out for. Pensively, I stand behind the coffin in the funeral chapel, holding a simple bouquet, while the organ plays Handel's Largo, a piece that does not receive nearly the respect it deserves. The cemetery cafe is my regular haunt. There I spend the intervals between my professional engagements, although sometimes I walk behind coffins which have not been engaged to me to follow. I pay for flowers out of my own pocket and join the welfare worker who walks behind the coffin of some homeless person. From time to time, I also visit Wunsiedl's grave, for after all, I owe it to him that I discovered my true vocation, a vocation in which pensiveness is essential and inactivity my duty. It was not until much later that I realized I had never bothered to find out what was being produced in Wunsiedl's factory. I expect it was soap.
Thank you, Ricky. We're going to take a short break right now. I'm going to turn it over to Chris to tell you a little bit about what we're doing at Eventide and to make an appeal for support during this difficult time.
Thanks, Toby. Hi, everybody. First off, I want to apologize. When we started the intro earlier on, I've been so busy trying to get some of this Eventide stuff sorted out. I was completely at a loss for words, and I told everyone to text a number to donate, but I didn't tell anybody else how. So let me try this again. First off, if you're watching and you like what you're seeing and you want to support us, what I would ask you to do is text the letters ETC, that's our initials, ETC, to the number 44321. That'll actually give you a link where you can connect and find ways to support what we're doing. What are we doing? Well, obviously, we're doing this, which we love. This has been something we've been doing since the summer, actually. And it's been great, and it's been really well received, and we've had so much fun doing this for you. Being able to bring so many of our local actors, our local talent in to share stories with you. Some stories new, some stories familiar, but all of them just wonderfully well read. And that's really a cornerstone of what we're trying to do for all of you folks. Like all of you, hopefully you're sitting at home someplace comfortable. I'm sitting here by my fireplace, and I'm listening to these great stories. However, 2021 is here. And we have a lot of new and really exciting things on the boards. We are going to continue with Eventide Tales, and I'll let Toby share with you what his plans are for that, because there's a lot of great stuff coming up. But we're also going to be relaunching our virtual playhouse, which is going to be very exciting. We're looking at doing that in March with the premiere of a play called Cece by a playwright who's got some Cape Cod connections. That'll be on March 6th. And going forward, every month we are going to have a new original play, which we will premiere for our audience here. We're going to be making a shift, likely over to YouTube as well. So you'll still be able to find us here on Facebook, but you'll also have easier access, for those of you who have trouble finding the link sometimes, to find us on YouTube. And most exciting, on February 13th, 14th, and 15th, we will be premiering the Winter Showcase for our Playwrights Etc. Playwright Lab. Now, the Playwright Lab is something that we started earlier this year. We had a very generous donor who had come in and made the suggestion that we start this Playwrights Lab, and with her help, we were able to put together quite a program. We brought Candace Perry on board, who is our current playwright in residence, and the Playwrights Lab right now is currently run by Jim Daglish, who is also an accomplished playwright in the area. Now, these guys have really been working with some of the local talent here to cultivate a really just wonderful body of work. And they are going to be premiering a series of short plays on the 13th, 14th, and 15th at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Each play is going to be about 10 to 15 minutes long, and we encourage you to join us. Come on in and help support some of these local actors and artists who are coming in. I guarantee you everything that you're going to see is going to be something new and fresh and creative, and we're excited about it. And this being the first opportunity to showcase the Playwrights Lab, which we hope is going to become yet another foundational piece of Eventide Theater as we continue to grow and continue to offer artistic services or artistic and cultural offerings to our community. So please, if you're enjoying these stories, take some time, think about making a donation, a small donation, a large donation, a substantial donation, anything that you can give us, be it the cost of a few cups of coffee to something to help support our season is welcomed. And you can do that very simply by just texting the letters ETC to 44321. Or if you're not a big fan of texting or you don't want to use those phones, you can always go to our website and do that. And worst case scenario, you are always welcome to make a donation by sending us a check. You can just mail it to us at Eventide Theater Company at 713 Main Street in Dennis, Massachusetts. Toby, why don't you tell us a little bit about some of your plans coming up with the Eventide Tales?
Well, in 2 weeks, we are going to be returning. I don't have a calendar in front of me. I believe that's like February 6th or 7th. And one of the things we're going to do there is we're going to do a science fiction takeover, where we're going to be reading stories by some of the masters of science fiction, including Ray Bradbury, Ursula K. Le Guin, and Arthur C. Clarke, and hopefully get an Isaac Asimov tale in there as well. I'm really looking forward to it. In March, we're going to put together essentially a greatest hits show. We've done 10 of these programs now, and we'll be doing several more in the meantime. But what we're going to do is to bring back some of the people who have read stories in the past and essentially do a greatest hits album of the Eventide Tales. Look forward to seeing you.
That's going to be a lot of fun. I'm really excited. And Toby, I cannot thank you enough for everything you've done, both getting this program to where it is and putting it together, and everything that you're doing to bring it forward.
Well,
It's that level of support from folks like you and folks in our community that really make Eventide shine. As a community theater and an all-volunteer organization, we really do count on the contributions of time and effort and talent of people like Toby, and I don't mean to talk about from the third person, but I'm addressing our audience. Folks like Toby really help make this show sing and make what we do special. But it does still cost us some money. So again, my last pitch, if you can do something to help support us, to help cover the cost of our mailings and our technology and the subscription services that allow us to pay for this Zoom service, please consider doing so. Again, very simply, text ETC to 44321. Find us on our webpage or send us a check at 713 Main Street in Dennis, Massachusetts. Thank you so much. I'm going to turn this back over. I've talked far, far, far too long, but I'm very excited about our upcoming season, everything else we're doing. I'm going to get myself off the screen. I'm going to turn it back over to our actors. Toby, if you want to take it and introduce our next story, thank you so much for everything you do.
thank you, Chris. Our next story is by William Sidney Porter, and he is best known by his pen name, O. Henry. O. Henry, who in his time was called the American answer to the French writer Guy de Maupassant, whose work we have heard in the past. Most of Henry's stories are set in his own time, the early 20th century, and one of his best known stories is The Gift of the Magi, a holiday favorite even to this day. In this next story, Confessions of a Humorist, Henry presents us with a man who tries to turn what he loves into a profession and finds out that doing what you love has unexpected consequences. This is Confessions of a Humorist by O. Henry. There was a painless stage of incubation that lasted 25 years, and then it broke out in me, and people said I had it. But they called it humor instead of measles. Employees in the store brought a silver inkstand for the senior partner on his 50th birthday. We crowded into his private office to present it. I had been selected for spokesman, and I made a little speech that I had been preparing for a week. It was a hit. It was full of puns and epigrams and funny twists that brought down the house, which was a very solid one in the wholesale hardware line. Old Marlowe himself actually grinned, and the employees took their cue and roared. My reputation as a humorist dates from 9:30 on that morning. For weeks afterward, my fellow clerks fanned the flame of my self-esteem One by one, they came to me saying, "What an awfully clever speech it was, old man," and then carefully explained to me the point of each one of my jokes. Gradually, I found that I was expected to keep it up. Others might speak sanely on business matters and the day's topics, but from me, something gamesome and airy was required. I was expected to crack jokes about the crockery and lighten up the graniteware with persiflage. I was second bookkeeper, and if I failed to show up with a balance sheet without something comic about the footings, or could find no case for laughter in an invoice of plows, the other clerks were disappointed. By degrees, my fame spread, and I became a local character. Our town was small enough to make this possible. The daily newspaper quoted me. At social gatherings, I was indispensable. I believe I did possess a considerable wit and a facility for quick and spontaneous repartee. This gift I cultivated and improved with practice, and the nature of it was kindly and genial, not running to sarcasm or offending others. People began to smile when they saw me coming, and by the time we had met, I had generally had a word ready to broaden that smile into a laugh. I had married early. We had a charming boy of 3 and a girl of 5. Naturally, we lived in a vine-covered cottage and were happy. My salary as a bookkeeper in the hardware concern kept at a distance those ills attendant upon superfluous wealth. At sundry times, I had written out a few jokes and conceits that I considered peculiarly happy and had sent them to certain periodicals that print such things. All of them had been instantly accepted. Several of the editors had written to request further contributions. One day, I received a letter from the editor of a famous weekly publication. He suggested that I submit to him a humorous composition to fill a column of space, hinting that he would make it a regular feature of each issue if the work proved satisfactory. I did so, and at the end of 2 weeks, he offered to make a contract with me for a year at a figure that was considerably higher than the amount paid to me by the hardware firm. I was filled with delight. My wife already crowned me in her mind with the imperishable evergreens of literary success. We had lobster croquettes and a bottle of blackberry wine for supper that night. There was the chance to liberate myself from drudgery. I talked over the matter very seriously with Louisa. We agreed that I must resign my place at the store and devote myself to humor. The next morning, I awoke and looked at the clock. "Late, by George!" I exclaimed and grabbed for my clothes. Louisa reminded me that I was no longer a slave to hardware and contractor supplies. I was now a professional humorist. After breakfast, she proudly led me to the little room off the kitchen. Dear girl, there was my table and chair, writing pad, ink, and pipe tray, and all the author's trappings: the celery stand full of fresh roses and honeysuckle, last year's calendar on the wall, the dictionary, and a little bag of chocolates to nibble between inspirations. Dear girl. I sat me down to work. The wallpaper is patterned with arabesques or obelisks, or perhaps it is trapezoids. Upon one of those figures, I fixed my eyes. I bethought me of humor. A voice startled me, Louisa's voice. "If you aren't too busy, dear," it said, "come to dinner." I looked at my watch. Yes, 5 hours had been gathered by the grim scytheman. I went to dinner. "Oh, you mustn't work too hard at first," said Louisa. "Goethe, or was it Napoleon, said 5 hours a day is enough for mental labor. Couldn't you take me and the children to the woods this afternoon?" "I am a little tired," I admitted. So we went to the woods. But soon I got the swing of it. Within a month, I was turning out copy as regular as shipments of hardware. And I had success. My column in the weekly made some stir, and I was referred to in a gossipy way by critics as something fresh in the line of humorists. I augmented my income considerably by contributing to other contributions. I picked up the tricks of the trade. I would take a funny idea and make a 2-line joke out of it, earning $1. I began to save up money, and we had a new carpet and a parlor organ. My townspeople began to look upon me as a citizen of some consequence instead of a merry trifler. The merry trifler I had been when I clerked in the hardware store. After about 5 or 6 months, the spontaneity seemed to depart from my humor. Quips and droll sayings no longer fell carelessly from my lips. I, I was sometimes hard run for material. I found myself listening to catch available ideas from the conversations of my friends. Sometimes I chewed my pencil and gazed at the wallpaper for hours, trying to build up some gay little bubble of unstudied fun. And then I became a harpy, a Moloch, a Jonah, a vampire to my acquaintances. Anxious, haggard, greedy, I stood among them like a veritable killjoy. Let a bright saying, a witty comparison, a piquant phrase fall from their lips, and I was after it like a hound springing upon a bone. I dared not trust my memory, but turning aside guiltily and meanly, I would make a note of it in my ever present memorandum book or upon the cuff of my shirt for my own future use. My friends began to regard me with sorrow and wonder. I was not the same man. Where once I had furnished them with entertainment and jollity, I now preyed upon them. No jest from me ever bid for their smiles now. They were too precious. I could not afford to dispense gratuitously the means of my livelihood. Nearly everyone began to avoid me. I even forgot how to smile, not even paying that much for the savings I had appropriated. Even in church, my demoralized fancy went hunting among the solemn aisles and pillars for spoil. My own home became a hunting ground. My wife is a singularly feminine creature, candid, sympathetic, and impulsive. Once her conversation was my delight, and her ideas a source of unfailing pleasure. Now I worked her. She was a gold mine of those amusing but lovable inconsistencies that distinguish the female mind. With devilish cunning, I encouraged her to talk. Unsuspecting, she laid her heart bare. Upon the cold, conspicuous, common printed page, I offered it to the public gaze. A literary Judas, I kissed her and betrayed her. For pieces of silver, I dressed her sweet confidences and made them dance in the marketplace. Dear Louisa, of nights I have spent over her, cruel as a wolf above a tender lamb, hearkening even to her soft words murmured in sleep, hoping to catch an idea for next day's grind. There is worse to come. God help me! Next, my fangs were buried deep in the neck of the fugitive sayings of my little children. Guy and Viola were two bright fountains of childish, quaint thoughts and speeches. I found a ready sale for this kind of humor and was furnishing a regular department in a magazine with funny fancies of childhood. I began to stalk them as an Indian stalks the antelope. I would hide behind sofas and doors or crawl on my hands and knees among the bushes in the yard to eavesdrop while they were at play. I had all the qualities of a harpy, except remorse. Once, when I was barren of ideas and my copy must leave in the next mail, I covered myself in a pile of autumn leaves in the yard where I knew they intended to come and play. I cannot bring myself to believe that Guy was aware of my hiding place, but even if he was, I would be loath to blame him for setting fire to the leaves, causing the destruction of my new suit of clothes and nearly cremating a parent. Soon my own children began to shun me as a pest. Often, when I was creeping upon them like a melancholy ghoul, I would hear them say to each other, "Here comes Papa," and they would gather their toys and scurry away to some safer hiding place. Miserable wretch that I was! And yet I was doing well financially. Before the first year passed, I had saved $1,000 and we had lived in comfort. But at what cost? I am not quite clear as to what a pariah is, but I was everything that it sounds like. I had no friends, no amusements, no enjoyment of life. The happiness of my family had been sacrificed. I was a bee, sucking sordid honey from life's fairest flowers, dreaded and shunned on account of my sting. One day a man spoke to me with a pleasant and friendly smile. Not in months had that thing happened. I was passing the undertaking establishment of Peter Heffelblower. Peter stood in the door and saluted me. I stopped, strangely wrung in my heart by his greeting. He asked me inside. The day was chill and rainy. We went into the back room where a fire burned in a little stove. A customer came and Peter left me alone for a while. Presently, I felt a new feeling stealing over me, a beautiful sense of calm and content. I looked around at the place. There were rows of shining rosewood caskets, black palls, trestles, hearse plumes, mourning streamers, and all the paraphernalia of the solemn trade. Here was peace, order, silence, the abode of grave and dignified reflections. Here, on the brink of life, was a little niche pervaded by the spirit of eternal rest. When I entered it, the follies of the world abandoned me at the door. I felt no inclination to wrest a humorous idea from those somber and stately trappings. A quarter of an hour ago, I was an abandoned humorist. Now I was a philosopher full of serenity and ease. I had found a refuge from humor, from the hot chase of the shy quip, from the degrading pursuit of the panting joke, from the restless reach after the nimble repartee. I had not known Heffelblower well. When he came back, I let him talk, fearful that he might prove to be a jarring note in the sweet, dirge-like harmony of his establishment. Oh, but no, he chimed truly. I gave a long sigh of happiness. Never have I known a man's talk to be as magnificently dull as Peter's was. Compared with the Dead Sea, compared with it, the Dead Sea is a geyser. Never a sparkle or glimmer of wit marred his words. Quaking a little, I tried upon him one of my best pointed jokes. It fell back ineffectual, with the point broken. I loved that man from then on. 2 or 3 evenings each week, I would steal down to Heffelblower's and revel in his back room. It was my only joy. I began to rise early and hurry through my work that I might spend more time in my haven. In no other place could I throw off my habit of extracting humorous ideas from my surroundings. Under this influence, I began to improve in spirits. It was the recreation from one's labor that every man needs. I surprised 1 or 2 of my former friends by throwing them a smile and a cheery word as I passed them on the streets. Several times I dumbfounded my family by relaxing long enough to make a jocose remark in their presence. I had so long been ridden by the incubus of humor that I seized my hours of holiday with the schoolboy's zest. My work began to suffer. It was not the pain and burden to me that it had been. I often whistled at my desk and wrote with far more fluency than before. I accomplished my tasks impatiently, as anxious to be off to my helpful retreat as a drunkard is to get to his tavern. My wife had some anxious hours in conjecturing where I spent my afternoons. I thought it best not to tell her. Women do not understand these things. Poor girl, she had one shock out of it. One day I brought home a silver coffin handle for a paperweight and a fine, fluffy hearse plume to dust my papers with. But Louisa found them and she shrieked in horror. I had to console her with some lame excuse for having them. I saw in her eyes that the prejudice was not removed. I had to remove the articles, though, a double quick time. One day, Peter Heffelblower laid before me a temptation that swept me off my feet. In his sensible, uninspired way, he showed me his books and explained that his profits and his business were increasing rapidly. He had thought of taking in a partner with some cash. He would rather have me than anyone he knew. When I left his place that afternoon, Peter had my check for the $1,000 I had in the bank, and I was a partner in his undertaking business. I went home with feelings of delirious joy, mingled with a certain amount of doubt. I was dreading to tell my wife about it, but I walked on air. To give the writing of humorous stuff once more to enjoy the apples of life instead of squeezing them to a pulp for a few drops of hard cider to make the public feel funny. What a boon that would be! At the supper table, Louisa handed me some letters that had come during my absence. Several of them contained rejected manuscripts. Ever since I began going to Heffelblower's, my stuff had been coming back with an alarming frequency. Lately, I'd been dashing off my jokes and articles with the greatest fluency. Previously, I had labored like a bricklayer, slowly and with agony. Presently, I opened a letter from the editor of the weekly, with which I had a regular contract. The checks for that weekly article were still our main dependence. The letter ran thus: Dear Sir, as you are aware, our contract for the year expires with the present month. While regarding the necessity for doing so, we must say that we do not care to renew the same for the coming year. We were quite pleased with your style of humor, which seems to have delighted quite a large proportion of our readers, but for the past 2 months we have noticed a decided falling off in quality. Your earlier work showed a spontaneous, easy, natural flow of fun and wit. Of late it is labored, studied, and unconvincing, giving painful evidence of hard toil and drudging mechanism. Again, regretting that we do not consider your contributions available any longer, we are yours sincerely, the editor. I handed this letter to my wife. After she read it, her face grew extremely long, and there were tears in her eyes. The mean old thing, she exclaimed indignantly. I'm sure your pieces are just as good as they ever were before, and it doesn't take you half as long to write them as they did. And then, I suppose, Louisa thought of the checks that would cease coming. Oh, John, she wailed, what will we do now? For an answer, I got up and began to do a polka step around the supper table. I'm sure Louisa thought that the trouble had driven me mad, and I think the children hoped it had, for they tore after me, yelling with glee and emulating my steps. I was now something like their old playmate of yore. The theater for us tonight, I shouted. Nothing less, and a late, wild, disreputable summer supper for us all at the Palace Restaurant. Then I explained my glee by declaring that I was now partner in a prosperous undertaking establishment, and that written jokes might go hide their heads in sackcloth and ashes for all of me. With the editor's letter in her hand to justify the deed I had done, my wife could advance no objections, save a few mild ones, based on the feminine inability to appreciate a good thing, such as the little back room of Peter of Heffelblowers and Company undertaking establishment. In conclusion, I will say that today you will find no man in our town as well liked, as jovial, and as full of merry sayings as I. My jokes are again noised about and quoted. Once more I take pleasure in my wife's confidential chatter without a mercenary thought, while Guy and Viola play at my feet, distributing gems of childish humor without the fear of the ghastly tormentor who used to dog their steps, notebook in hand. Our business has prospered finely. I keep the books and look after the shop while Peter attends to outside matters. He says that my levity and high spirits would simply turn any funeral into a regular Irish wake. Thank you all. We've got one more story for you. This one is by Susanna Wolf. Susanna Wolf is the editor-in-chief of collegehumor.com and is considered one of the up-and-coming new voices in humor, and a writer whose work has appeared in both the New York Times and in the New Yorker. In her piece, Gender Reveal Party, Wolf takes aim at the recent trend in young couples who go to ridiculous lengths to announce the sex of their babies. The story will be read by Emily Murray.
Gender Reveal Party by Susanna Wolf. You are joyfully invited to join me and Mark as we publicly learn through a series of elaborate, borderline nonsensical acts of increasingly violent destruction, whether we are expecting a son or a daughter. What will it be? Tonka trucks or tutus, baseball bats or Barbie dream houses? Will I suddenly become one of those women who balance a newsboy cap on their baby's head and start calling him my little man? Or will I insist on squeezing giant bow headbands around my infant skull so everyone knows that despite having inherited all of Mark's most unattractive features, our baby is a girl? Whatever it is, please photograph every second of how #blessed and #happy now we are at the moment of the reveal. Unless the baby is revealed to be the wrong gender. In which case, please turn off all recording devices and quietly exit through the side door so that I can sob and face my fear of parenting such a hideous and ungodly creature. Boy. The wrong one is boy. Of course, we have already some parental intuition about what our baby is. Ever since I cheated on Mark with a mysterious stranger whom I met at a terranium crafting workshop, I have been having dreams about our baby's glowing red eyes and ability to murder people with its mind, specifically Julie, my soul cycle nemesis. Still, we can't know for sure what gender our baby will be until we burn down a park by illegally setting off blue fireworks, or cause an endangered migratory bird to choke on the pink balloons that we release into the sky, or accidentally shoot a bunch of paintballs through Julie's window in the closet where she keeps her athleisure clothes. What's that? No, that paint isn't any special color. This used to be the kind of information that a person would receive in the privacy of a doctor's office and then share with friends and family members who showed a specific interest. But now, thanks to the fact that social media has turned pregnancy and parenting and life itself into a competitive performance art, we can all learn the gender of my fetus together. You may find yourself thinking, how could discovering the answer to a single question sustain an entire party? If so, then you, my friend, are from a cooler time in my life, have not spent nearly as many hours on Pinterest as I have. First, we'll have a really big box. Next, we'll open the box. Inside the box, there will be a huge balloon. Some people might choose to have it be a pink balloon or a blue balloon to get the reveal over with. Not us. The balloon is going to be gold. Then we'll pop the balloon. Will the gender be revealed here? No. When the balloon pops, you see that there is a cake inside. We'll cut the cake to reveal a live grenade. We'll chuck the grenade out the window into a bush that was planted on the wedding day in anticipation of this very moment. The bush will explode and reveal the door to an underground bunker. We'll open the door and find the huddled form of our sonogram technician who was helpfully kidnapped by my Aunt Gail 2 weeks ago. Thank you, Aunt Gail. After we help the sonogram tech out of her subterranean prison and allow her eyes to adjust to the light, she'll give us the piece of paper she tried to offer us at the obstetrician's appointment a few weeks ago, before we slapped it out of her hand while screaming a cryptic warning about magical moments and Aunt Gail. Finally, get ready to lose it, because we'll read the paper and say the word boy or girl out loud. Boom, gender revealed. Will the party be done after this? Not a chance. Once we know the chromosomal makeup of the avocado-sized collection of cells in my uterus, it'll be time to talk names. And boy, oh boy, do we have some terrible names picked out. For a son, we're thinking Jagger or Axel, or something else our kid will definitely not be cool or attractive enough to pull off. And for a girl, you guessed it, trendy, vaguely gay, like made up gibberish. And you've got it, Kaylee. Yes, spelled Kayleigh. We've got Harper, which would be an acceptable kind of unoriginal option, if not for the fact that her full name will be Harper Parker. And last, but also certainly not least, we've got Taylene, which, fun fact, is the angelicized version of nothing. Aunt Gail has a lot of questions about circumcision, and regardless of whether we're having a boy or a girl, she's going to share them while making sure that the whole room knows that Mark is not circumcised. Once that information about your friend's genitals has been seared into your brain, it'll be time to say goodbye. That is until we see you again in a few weeks for the baby shower, because yes, we are also having one of those. I'm looking forward to seeing you. Be prepared to sign a release form.
Thank you, Emily. That was wonderful. I want to thank all of the actors who've taken part today. Emily Murray, Ricky Bourgeois, and Elizabeth Lutzi. Thank you all for tuning in with us. We will be back in 2 weeks with a science fiction takeover. I want to thank Frank for helping us out on the technical aspects. And Chris, thank you again for hosting us today.
Thank you, Toby.
Thank you much.